Greetings, citizens, and welcome to this two-part series on the Industrial Revolution. Part 1 will cover the lengthy causes of the Industrial Revolution in Britain, and Part 2 will cover the consequences, as well as some other intriguing stuff. Here we go. So, the Industrial Revolution. All right, so essential questions. To be totally honest, the majority of coverage with the Industrial Revolution and the AP exam and even the Regents exam in global history often covers the causes of industrialization. Why did the Industrial Revolution begin in Great Britain and then spread to the rest of Europe and eventually the United States as well? So those are the majority of the questions, and that's what we're going to cover in Part 1. Okay, so first things first. One of the first major causes of industrialization is the agricultural revolution. So yes, I know we're talking about two different revolutions, but the agricultural revolution will help lead to the industrial revolution. So remember, in this context, the term revolution really means significant change. And again, it's going to happen over a period of time. It's not going to be like 2 days. So here we go, agricultural revolution. So the first major element of the agricultural revolution is a change the British Parliament makes. So historically in Britain, there was in a little town, a township, county, what have you, there was common land where any British peasant could farm, graze their animals especially, and they could do that legally. But then the British Parliament passes a new set of laws that basically allows the privatization of that common land. So they started selling this common land to wealthy landowners. So what that basically will do is that regular average Joe peasant in Britain can't afford to buy that land. They would either rent it from that landowner or just bought it, or more likely, this is going to put them out of a job. So this will lead to significant migration from the countryside, more agrarian parts of Britain, to the cities. So this is a great example of urbanization. I would write that on your notes right here. So basically what this is going to now do is the enclosure movement is going to dramatically increase the population of English, Scottish, and some Welsh cities, and that will eventually be the means of having cheap available labor for eventually what we'll call factories. That's huge. All right, next, the agricultural revolution will include some new technological advancements, so I'll try to make these as short as possible. My personal favorite out of all of them is the seed drill, invented by a great person, awesome name, Jethro Tull. Be a great name for like a folk band. So the seed drill essentially mechanizes the process of planting seeds. So what it does is it's a wooden mechanical structure. It's pulled by a horse. And in one motion, the seed drill will drill a hole for the seed, plant the seed, and then cover up that hole with dirt, allowing for a much more efficient planting process. And additionally, it dramatically increases the yields of harvest, like 75% better harvest because of the seed drill. Because historically, the way to plant seeds quickly is just chuck your seeds across the farm, the pasture. And the reality of that is most of it gets eaten by birds, blown away by the wind. This mechanizes the process and makes it so much more efficient. So if you have more food that's produced, that's going to lower the price of food. And that means more people can buy it, which usually means you can make more babies, therefore population will increase. So Jethro Tull's seed drill is a good one to know. The threshing machine by Andrew Meikle, this basically mechanizes the harvesting process here. Instead of using like that hand scythe, Grim Reaper style, you have now mechanized the process. What else do we got? Ooh, the Dutch four-field system, sometimes called the Dutch four-crop system, but it was invented by Charles Turnip, was his nickname, Townsend, and essentially is a more efficient means of crop rotation. So you probably covered crop rotation last year in Global One with the Neolithic Revolution of some sort. This is going to actually make an even more efficient and profitable means. So you're actually not leaving one of those fields barren. You're actually using all of them to garner more money, and it's more efficient. So the four-field system is going to also increase the efficiency of agricultural production, leading to lower prices, leading to usually more babies being born. Next. All right, new crops. The potato has finally made its way into the European diet. So the British Isles are a great place to plant potatoes. You could stick that sucker in the ground, and that thing will grow. It has a high yield for a pretty minimal amount of input. The potato has high carbs, a lot of other nutrients, and you can make potatoes in so many different ways. And of course, potato will be particularly important for Ireland. Additionally, American corn, also known as maize, is going to be particularly used for feeding animals. By the way, in Britain, when they use the word corn, they mean grain. Like I'm talking about wheat, barley. If they use the term maize, that's what we are familiar with as like American corn. So maize, American corn, but corn with the Industrial Revolution in Britain usually means grain. I know, confusing. Okay, so what is the impact of the agricultural revolution? Well, it's going to lead to a population explosion. And guess what? You need to have an increase in population if you're going to have available labor for the factory system. So that is huge. All right. Next, another cause of industrialization in Britain. Why did it happen in Britain first? Well, Britain was gifted with a great deal of natural resources, which will answer most of the questions on the Regents exam correct. But of course, we're going to go into more depth than that. So first of all, got to know the mineral resources. Britain has two hugely important ones, iron and coal. So of course, what can you use iron for? I don't know. Bridges. Oh, I don't know. A new invention called the train, railways. Iron is huge. Additionally, making iron cheaply is probably even more important. And of course, how do you even make your train function? You need some type of fuel. Britain has a ton of coal in its ground. Obviously going to be useful for trains. It will also be useful for eventually, in my opinion, one of the most important inventions in human history, the steam engine, which will not only make the trains operate, it will also make factories run as well. Additionally, Britain, even though it's a small set of islands, they have a bunch of rivers that are navigable. So what I mean by navigable, it means you can put a boat on it, go down your way, and not fall off like a waterfall and die, like, Niagara Falls style. So Britain's rivers are fairly tame, pun intended in this case, although I pronounced it wrong. In this case, they have many major rivers, but two to kind of know. One in particular is the Thames in London. So that major waterway that connects London to the sea is called the Thames. Please do not pronounce it Thames, unless you want a British bartender to give you a really weird look. The Thames, folks. And then the famous river in Liverpool, the home of the Beatles, Mersey. Okay, so besides rivers to transport goods from, factories, Britain has a bunch of ports. Factories are only useful if you, can sell the stuff. So the ports not only be useful for exporting, but also importing. So obviously, remember, Britain has the largest colonial empire in this time, the 1800s right here. They're going to be importing a lot of the raw materials, like, say, cotton from India, and then eventually turning it into yarn, into some type of goods in their factories in Liverpool, London, Bristol, and then they can be exported, actually, back to people they stole the resource from in the first place. So the ports are huge, and Britain has many natural ports. Because of their jagged coastline, it is apt geography for making many ports, or having many ports. All right, next. So talking back about the coal. So we have had, the idea of making iron using coal has been around for a while, but they didn't really figure out a way to make it very inexpensive until we have a dude named Abraham Darby. So one of the cheapest versions of iron to make is called pig iron. And essentially, historically, they would use it by using like wood, timber to create charcoal, and then you can smelt it, etc., etc. But what changes here is they figured out a way to use what Britain has a lot of, coal, to chemically be decomposed and then have a ready supply of iron. So basically, they're using what they have a ton of, coal, decomposing it and creating a very cheaply made version of iron, which you can, of course, make into trains, bridges, what have you. So this entire process really does change the way they make iron. If you can produce more things cheaply, that means it's going to drive down the prices and it can be used much more extensively. So hugely important, especially for the production of the steam engine. All right, next. Okay. The development of the factory system is going to be a major cause of the Industrial Revolution. You can't use the term Industrial Revolution without talking about factories, of course. So let's first talk about what the factory system will replace, mostly replace. So historically, especially starting 1700s, 1600s arguably, the way textiles were produced was called the domestic system. Another term for the domestic system was called the putting out system. And this is where, in the countryside, in the convenience of their own homes, predominantly women, would be subcontracted to produce textiles, wools, maybe some constables, usually wools, and they would then sell that to an entrepreneur who could then sell it and produce an actual useful textiles and then sell it in larger numbers. So that system was great for women who didn't have to leave their homes, but it also wasn't super efficient. So that's where we get the development of the factory system. So the factory system is still used to the very day, for better or for worse, and it is a monumentally important invention in human history. So the difference here is that the labor is not in the convenience of your own home. It is now you're going to be leaving your home and actually going to a building where all of the machinery is kept and you make it between the hours of 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. or something of that nature. It depends on the time period. So here what the changes are. One, who's going to these factories? If they're textile factories, like they're making your wools or cottons, whatever, that's predominantly women. So first of all, that's huge. One, women are largely now leaving their homes to go work somewhere else. That's a first in women's history where they're physically leaving the home to work in large numbers. Obviously, that's happened before, but as a grand scheme, big picture, this is huge. So in these factories, initially they were located next to a power source. Before we had the steam engine, that meant a running river. So that river would be used to power all the mechanisms, etc., to actually make the stuff. But eventually, you get the steam engine, you don't actually need to put your factory next to a river. So what this factory system becomes synonymous with is urbanization, because where are most people living now? Oh, they're starting to now live in cities, thereby urbanization. So now we have these factories that are going to promote larger urbanization. So basically, the factory system also dramatically increases the sizes of British cities. Just looking at the expansion of London, of Manchester, of Liverpool, these major centers of factories is so quick, actually. It's really cool. All right, this is kind of a neat little reading about Manchester in particular. The nickname of Manchester was Cottonopolis because, of course, it produces many cotton textiles. And it's a little fun little read, so you can read that if you'd like. So, I gotta give you a little fashion history moment of the day. So I told you the domestic system was largely replaced by the factory system, but there are still some British textiles made the old school way. So there is one type of fabric made in Scotland that still uses that cottage industry or the domestic system means of producing textiles, and it's called Harris tweed. So tweed is that really coarse, rough wool fabric, great for colder climates that are very windy and rainy. And what makes Harris tweed special in particular is that it is by law, it was actually a British Parliament passed a law about this, that has to be produced in people's homes and then sold to larger entrepreneurs who could then turn it into suits and stuff like that. So I actually have a few Harris tweed sport coats that you've probably seen me wear by now. But it has this gorgeous fabric, really coarse as a herringbone weave with it. So if you ever see this term Harris tweed, you know that was by law required to be produced using that cottage industry system. Pretty neat. Okay, so additional causes. These aren't going to be crazily important, but, from Global One, roads do matter, folks. So if you're going to be transporting your goods, you want to make sure your goods don't get broken. And having stable, not super bumpy roads is important. So Britain actually starts making the best roads since the Roman Empire. Largely Europeans kind of sucked at making roads since the fall of the Roman Empire in 476 AD. And the change here is you have a British engineer named Scottish engineer John Macadam, who basically makes a layer system with the roads, and eventually you now have more stable roads, and that usually makes the prices of goods go down. Thank you, Johnny. Moving on. All right, next one, railways, put a bajillion stars on it, hugely important. Additionally, put some new stars on the invention of the steam engine. So a major cause of why does the Industrial Revolution begin in Britain? Well, the British invent the steam engine and the train and the railways, and that's going to be synonymous with, of course, the Industrial Revolution. So the steam engine, wicked important. So the steam engine is going to increase the speed of transportation. So the steam engine initially was actually made to pump water out of mines, but eventually we're going to see improvements by a dude, especially by named James Watt and his buddy Matthew Boulton, but James Watt's the key one, and they make a much more efficient steam engine that can also be used with transportation. So eventually they make the steam engine power this new contraption called the train, and now we can start increasing the speed of transportation. So one of the most famous initial railway lines that connected Liverpool to Manchester, which are in northwest England, was called the Rocket. And this thing was wicked fast! 28 miles per hour, top speed fast. But of course, compared to the existing transportation of, using boats and using horses, this is much faster. And of course, eventually we'll get trains that will go significantly faster than just 28 miles per hour. So why does this matter? If you now have a faster means of transportation, that means the price of goods will go down, demand usually increases, and people can buy more stuff. That's hugely important. So the train is one of the most important inventions in human history, obviously, along with the steam engine. Gotta know it. So eventually, they have to figure out ways of, traversing rivers, valleys. How do you literally put a train going through a mountain? Super cool stuff. So, gotta know it. All right, so Iron Bridge, important invention in human history, obviously replaces the wooden bridges. So iron bridges, you need them if you're going to put a really heavy object over them. That's just not a horse and buggy anymore. If you're going to have a train, you need an iron bridge. So obviously, being able to produce a lot of iron cheaply is going to be pretty stinking important, going back to that Abraham Darby process. All right, so cool, if you're into engineering at all, and if you study engineering in college, I can pretty much guarantee you will look at one of the most famous British engineers of all time, Sir Isambard Kingdom Brunel, great name for a future cat or something, and he invents the famous box tunnel. So what is this? Cheapest, fastest way of being able to make a tunnel that goes right through a mountain. He invented the box tunnel. And it's a pretty neat invention if you're into engineering history, so you can give it a little Google. I'm just going to kind of skip through this at the moment. But he is immensely important in engineering history. He also makes one of the first suspension bridges. This is a bridge that looks really familiar to us in 2023. And this was done in the 19th century. All right, give those a read if you'd like. All right, here's a little, you probably have seen this before, so if you're into Harry Potter, this should look very familiar to you. So the Glenfinnan Viaduct was constructed during the Second Industrial Revolution, and initially was I think it was the largest viaduct in Britain, but I think it was eventually replaced. I'll double check that, sorry. And what's really cool about it is they still actually use a steam engine today to power the train that goes around it. It's totally just a tourist train now, but this is the viaduct they filmed one of the, I think the second Harry Potter movie. Super cool. You can actually still, buy a ticket. It's called the Jacobite train. You can buy your ticket if you ever go to Scotland in the summer. And it actually goes over this viaduct two times a day at the exact same 2 times. And you just see a bunch of people who are just Harry Potter fanatics, just hang out on the side of the hill just to take photos of this Harry Potter train. So here's me and my cardboard cutout of Taylor Swift. She also is a Harry Potter fan, obviously. So there we go. Yeah, I know. Weird. Anyways, let's keep going. It's such a good little video, but we're going to skip it for now. Skippity skip. So many videos. All right, so to me, you can't talk about industrialization in Britain without talking about colonialism and imperialism. So where are the British getting their raw materials, especially cotton? Well, initially it was from the southern states of the U.S., but then when they became independent, they needed a new source, and that happened to be British India. Great climate to grow cotton. So the British are going to take that raw material from British India. then send it back to Britain, and then they're going to turn that cotton fiber into yarn, and then turn that yarn into cotton cloth, where then they can sell that finished good back to the people they just took it from. So actually, the British Empire will pass a law in British India that makes it illegal for an Indian to purchase cotton cloth from Indian merchants. They had to purchase it from British merchants. So they're basically making their money twice over. So you can't talk about industrialization without colonialism. So additionally, the impact of laissez-faire is huge. So the fact that Britain is really starting to latch itself onto the government shouldn't really be controlling the people running the factories is really big. So effectively, this laissez-faire system that's becoming much more common in the 19th century allows the entrepreneurs who run the factories to have a much more efficient system. That means they can make more money. So that's going to be particularly important for the British. So overall, we're going to see a significant growth of these factory owners or businessmen. And guess what class they're in? The middle class. So historically, the middle class in Europe is going to be a huge fan of laissez-faire economics. So at this point in time, we're starting to see kind of like a merging of mercantilism, because obviously we're talking about colonialism up here, with now capitalism, the growth of private ownership of the means of production. In this case, the means of production are factories. So we're kind of seeing this merging of mercantilism and laissez-faire. All right, so that is it for part 1. Thanks for listening. This next section will be part 2. See you in a bit.